October 12, 1943, 28,000 feet above Schweinfurt, Germany. Second Lieutenant Richard Eugene Fleming adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses beneath his oxygen mask for the third time. The lenses kept fogging, despite the anti-fog coating he had carefully applied using a formula he had calculated himself. Through the plexiglass canopy of his P-47 Thunderbolt, Fleming watched 320 B-17 Flying Fortresses stretching across the German sky. His job, along with the 356th Fighter Group, was to protect them from the Luftwaffe fighters that would inevitably attack. The radio crackled with casual bravado from his squadron mates, jokes about German pilots, boasts about previous kills. Fleming remained silent, calculating fuel consumption rates, optimal altitude for engine performance, and ballistic trajectories of 50-caliber rounds. That morning at Martlesham Heath, Captain Jack Morrison had walked past Fleming's table and seen his equations. "Still doing homework, Professor?" Morrison said loud enough for everyone to hear. "War's not a math test, Fleming. It's about guts, reflexes, instinct. That fancy MIT education ain't worth spit up there." The room erupted in laughter. Fleming nodded and continued his calculations. They called him the Professor. Slide rule. 4 eyes. They excluded him from poker games and drinking sessions. They questioned how someone who looked like a librarian had ended up in a fighter cockpit. What none of them knew was that in 17 minutes, Fleming's analytical mind would identify a tactical opportunity that pure instinct would miss. The nerdy pilot they mocked would execute a maneuver so precisely calculated that 4 Messerschmitt Bf-109 fighters would fall from the sky in less than 90 seconds. And it would all begin with a differential equation. Born in Pasadena, California in 1919, Richard Fleming was the son of a mathematics teacher. By age 12, he had taught himself calculus. By 14, he was corresponding with Caltech professors about theoretical physics. His childhood was spent dismantling clocks, reading scientific journals, and building radios, not playing sports or dating. He entered MIT at 17 on full scholarship, graduating second in his class in aeronautical engineering in 1940. While classmates struggled with fluid dynamics, Fleming found these subjects intuitive and elegant. His thesis optimized propeller blade pitch using advanced mathematics. He took a job at Pratt & Whitney Aircraft, designing engines. For 18 months, he solved engineering problems and attended concerts alone. He was content, isolated, intellectually fulfilled. Pearl Harbor changed everything. Fleming saw fascism as an existential threat to rational thought and scientific inquiry. He decided to volunteer not as an engineer, but as a fighter pilot. Everyone thought he was crazy. Terrible eyesight, thin build, no athletic ability. His father said war wasn't fought with equations. Fleming replied, "Perhaps it should be." He believed one pilot who truly understood aircraft systems and ballistic physics might be worth 10 conventional pilots. In January 1942, Fleming volunteered. The recruiting sergeant barely suppressed laughter at the thin man with thick glasses. But Fleming had his MIT diploma, a pilot's license he had earned in preparation, and a recommendation letter from MIT's president. His physical exam nearly ended his career. Poor eyesight, low muscle mass, average reflexes. But the Army Air Forces was desperate for educated men. A sympathetic flight surgeon noted adequate corrected vision with spectacles. Recommend acceptance based on superior technical aptitude. Training was brutal. Fleming finished last in every physical exercise. His marching was clumsy, his military bearing weak, but he excelled at everything intellectual. Navigation problems others took hours to solve, he completed in minutes. He achieved perfect scores on aircraft recognition by memorizing mathematical ratios of wingspan to fuselage length. In the cockpit, he was naturally gifted. His instructor, Lieutenant Holloway, initially dismissed him but changed his mind after 3 flights. "Fleming's different. He's not instinctive, he's deliberate, but his precision is extraordinary. He doesn't feel the airplane, he understands it." Advanced training brought him to P-40 Warhawks and the fighter pilot culture that would define his experience. These men were confident, aggressive, competitive. Fleming stood out like a professor at a boxing match. During one exercise, he survived without being tagged by using calculated turn rates and positioning. The instructor seemed annoyed. "Fleming, how did you avoid being shot down?" Fleming pulled out his notebook. "Sir, I calculated that the P-40 has a maximum sustained turn rate of 17.3 degrees per second. I maintained parameters above 19 degrees per second. Additionally, I kept attackers backlit by the sun and anticipated your predictable attack pattern." "That's not how fighter combat works, Lieutenant. It's about instinct, aggression, killing spirit. All this calculating is going to get you killed." Fleming disagreed privately. Aerial combat was governed by physics and geometry, not instinct evolved for ground threats. He graduated in December 1942, fourth in flying skills, first academically. Peer evaluations were telling. Lacks fighter spirit. Too much thinking. Great at books, questionable in combat. Fleming was assigned to the 356th Fighter Group, flying P-47 Thunderbolts. The massive fighter was perfect for him, the most technically sophisticated American fighter. While others simply learned to fly it, Fleming studied every system, memorized every specification, calculated optimal performance for every situation. He spent hours in the cockpit memorizing controls, read manuals others never opened, corresponded with Republic engineers about structural limits. His squadron mates found this obsessive. Captain Morrison openly mocked him. "You planning to take a written test before you fight? The Krauts aren't going to wait while you work out the math." But Fleming was building a mental model of combat based on physics and statistics. He knew P-47s could dive faster than any German fighter. He calculated that 50 caliber rounds needed 2.3 seconds of sustained fire to guarantee structural failure of a Messerschmitt. Knowledge was becoming his weapon. The group deployed to England in July 1943, setting up at Martlesham Heath. Their mission was to escort bombers attacking Germany. Fleming's first combat came on August 15th. The target was Regensburg. He flew as Morrison's wingman. Before takeoff, Morrison briefed them. "Stay in formation, keep your eyes open. If we engage, stay aggressive. Don't overthink it." Fleming raised his hand. "Captain, I've calculated that if we maintain position 3,000 feet above the bombers, we'll have altitude and sun advantage when Germans attack. Fleming, just stay on my wing and do what I do. Save the math homework." Over Germany, 20 Messerschmitt 109s dove toward the bombers. Morrison led them to intercept. As they merged, Morrison pursued a single German in a climbing turn. Fleming immediately recognized the tactical error. The lighter Messerschmitt would maintain energy, while Morrison's speed bled off. Another German was positioning behind Morrison. Fleming broke formation without permission. He dove, gained 500 miles per hour, then pulled up behind the German stalking Morrison. His hands moved with mechanical precision. Gun sight aligned, deflection angle calculated, trigger squeeze. 850 caliber gun spoke. The Messerschmitt's tail disintegrated. Fleming's eyes identified another opportunity. 3 Germans positioning for a beam attack on bombers, spaced exactly 37 meters apart. If he approached from a specific angle, he could engage all 3 in sequence during one high-speed pass. But the geometry had to be perfect. He dove, building to 480 miles per hour, then pulled into a climbing turn that would intersect their path. His brain processed vectors and velocities in seconds. He fired at the precise moment physics aligned. 2-second burst. The lead Messerschmitt's cockpit exploded. He adjusted aim with mathematical precision. Another burst. The second fighter's wing separated. The third pilot broke hard right. But Fleming had predicted this. His third burst caught the Messerschmitt perfectly. Smoke poured out. In 43 seconds, Fleming had downed 3 aircraft using less than 600 rounds. Squadron average was 2,300 per kill. Morrison's voice crackled. "Fleming, where the hell are you?" "Rejoining formation, sir. 3 bandits destroyed." Long pause. "Say again?" "3 enemy fighters destroyed, sir. Verified visual." When they landed, Morrison confronted him on the flight line. "Fleming, you broke formation. That's court-martial." "Yes, sir. Probability of your survival if I maintained formation was 23%. Breaking formation improved it to 91%. The tactical situation warranted the violation. Morrison stared. You calculated all that while flying combat? Yes, sir. The equations are relatively simple. You really shot down 3 Germans? Yes, sir. Confirmed by gun camera. Morrison shook his head. The professor just became an ace in one mission. Actually, Fleming had 3 kills. He needed 2 more for ace status. But the squadron's attitude began shifting to confused respect. The nerdy pilot had demonstrated combat effectiveness that contradicted everything they believed. If you're enjoying this deep dive into one of history's most unlikely aerial combat stories, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. We bring you these detailed military history narratives every week, uncovering the stories of courage, innovation, and unexpected heroism that changed the course of World War II. Don't miss our upcoming video about the secret weapon that won the Battle of the Atlantic. Now back to Lieutenant Fleming's extraordinary journey. If you're enjoying this story about how intellectual firepower defeated physical dominance, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. We bring you detailed military history narratives every week, uncovering stories of innovation and unexpected heroism. Don't miss our upcoming videos. Now back to the mission that would make Fleming legendary. Over following weeks, Fleming flew 12 more missions. He damaged 3 German fighters and destroyed 1 more, bringing his total to 4. His approach remained analytical, studying weather, calculating fuel, reviewing intelligence before every mission. He kept a detailed combat log, recording altitude, airspeed, sun position, ammunition expended. Patterns emerged. Germans attacked from specific altitudes. Their tactics followed predictable sequences. Fleming was building a database, treating combat like scientific study. Squadron Commander Major O'Brien began requesting Fleming's tactical assessments. On September 28th, Fleming predicted Germans would attack from the south during a Bremen mission, despite intelligence suggesting east. The Germans attacked exactly as calculated. The squadron shot down 9 without loss. O'Brien started calling Fleming into planning. "Lieutenant, tell me what you think." Fleming would push up his glasses and launch into analysis. "Sir, intercepts suggest Jagdgeschwader 2 and 26 are in this sector, approximately 60 fighters. Given target value and our route, I estimate 87% probability of interception at 09:15 hours. They'll come from 20,000 feet above us, diving attacks in waves of 6. I recommend—" "Just tell me where they'll hit us." Fleming pointed at the map. "Here, sir." O'Brien looked at the thin lieutenant speaking about combat like mathematics. "You're the strangest fighter pilot I've ever met, but you're usually right." October brought deteriorating weather and desperate German resistance. The October 14th mission to Schweinfurt would become Black Thursday. 60 bombers lost, 600 airmen killed or captured. The October 12th mission, 2 days earlier, was the rehearsal. 320 bombers attacking Schweinfurt. Fighter escort was limited. P-47s barely had enough fuel. Fleming attended the 0430 briefing. Major O'Brien was blunt. "This is going to be rough. Deep target, Germans know we're coming. Fuel margins are tight. Stay disciplined, protect bombers, conserve ammunition." Fleming calculated. The mission would require maximum power, reducing fuel efficiency 17%. Combat would consume another 12%. That left only 300 gallons margin, not enough for extended combat, unless he modified the flight profile. He approached O'Brien after. "Sir, if we cruise at 22,000 feet instead of 25, we'll improve fuel efficiency 9.3%. We'll still have adequate altitude, because the Thunderbolt's dive performance allows engagement from any altitude above 20,000. Net effect is 45 gallons saved per aircraft, 11 additional minutes at full power." O'Brien stared at the calculations. "You worked this out this morning?" "No, sir. Last week. I predicted a Schweinfurt mission with 72% confidence based on target prioritization patterns." "You predicted we'd go to Schweinfurt?" Ball bearing production is a critical German bottleneck. 8th Air Force has been targeting choke points. Schweinfurt was the logical next objective. O'Brien shook his head. You're weird as hell, but I'm implementing your recommendation. At 06:15, Fleming climbed into his P-47. He went through his checklist with mechanical precision, then checked the mathematical tables taped to his instrument panel, verified his custom gunsight reticle, confirmed fuel calculations on his kneeboard. The formation took off at 06:45, rendezvoused with bombers over the English Channel, and began penetrating into Germany. Fleming flew as element leader with 2nd Lieutenant David Walsh as wingman. Walsh, a former mechanic from Detroit, was one of few pilots who respected Fleming. "Professor, you're the only guy who explains why things work instead of just telling us to do them. I'll fly your wing any time." As they crossed into Germany, Fleming's mind processed continuous calculations: fuel state, engine temperatures, bomber position, sun angle, threat vectors. His situational awareness was total through systematic scanning and probabilistic assessment. At 08:57, his analysis proved prescient. "Bandits, high and south," someone called. Fleming had been watching that sector for 4 minutes, having calculated it represented highest probability attack based on German fighter bases and mission patterns. Approximately 40 Messerschmitt 109s and Focke-Wulf 190s dove toward the bombers. 32 American Thunderbolts faced 4-to-1 odds. The sky exploded into chaos. Radio discipline collapsed into warnings, curses, desperate calls. Tracer rounds crisscrossed the sky. Aircraft dove, climbed, turned in three-dimensional combat. In this chaos, Fleming's analytical mind identified a pattern. 4 Messerschmitt 109s were executing coordinated attack on a struggling B-17 that had fallen behind, trailing smoke from number 3 engine. 2 fighters from each side attacking from beam positions where bombers' defensive guns had limited coverage. Fleming saw not 4 individuals, but a tactical system operating according to German doctrine. High side pass from starboard, break right, circle for port side pass. The pattern was so consistent it had to be trained behavior, which meant it was predictable, and anything predictable could be exploited. "Walsh, on me, engaging 4 bandits at 10 o'clock low." "Professor?" "That's 4 against 2. Bad odds." "Negative. Applied physics against trained response. Stay on my wing." Fleming rolled, inverted, and dove. The P-47 accelerated like a dropped anvil. 400 miles per hour, 450, 500. At this speed, controls stiffened dramatically. Most pilots would fight the aircraft. Fleming, who had calculated exact force required at various speeds, moved with mechanical precision. He had 11 seconds until Germans would fire on the bomber. He had calculated the geometry: altitude differential 6,000 feet, horizontal distance 2 miles, dive angle required to arrive behind German formation with optimal airspeed. The math was complex, but he solved it in 3 seconds, 5 seconds. Germans approaching firing positions, 4 seconds. Fleming's dive would bring him behind and slightly below their formation, 3 seconds. He began pull-out, G-forces crushing him into his seat, 2 seconds. Vision grade from blood draining. 1 second. His P-47, now at 530 miles per hour, leveled directly behind the 4 Messerschmitts. They were so focused on the bomber, none had seen his dive. Fleming had achieved surprise against 4 experienced pilots, but surprise alone wasn't enough. The Germans were in loose formation, separated by distance. The moment he fired at one, others would scatter. He would get 1 kill, maybe 2. The others would escape, unless he did something no fighter pilot had ever attempted, unless he applied ballistics in a way that defied conventional tactics. Fleming had studied ammunition ballistics obsessively. 50 caliber rounds exited at 2,900 feet per second, but decelerated from air resistance. At 1,000 yards, velocity dropped to 2,000. At 2,000 yards, 1,600. Different rounds followed different trajectories. What most pilots didn't understand was that this velocity differential created spread in the bullet stream. At long range, bullets leaving the gun simultaneously would arrive separated by time and space. Most pilots considered this a disadvantage, requiring closer range. Fleming saw opportunity. His 8 guns were bore-sighted to converge at 300 yards. At that range, all streams intersected in an 18-inch diameter cone, devastating but requiring precise aim. At longer ranges, streams spread, reducing hit probability, but increasing volume of space filled with projectiles. The 4 Messerschmitts were in rough line, each separated by 100 feet. They were 600 yards ahead, well beyond conventional range. Any normal pilot would close the distance. Fleming calculated in under 2 seconds. At 600 yards, his 8 gun streams would spread to approximately 30 feet wide and 20 feet tall. If he aimed not at any individual aircraft but at the center of the formation, the spreading streams would fill a volume all 4 Messerschmitts would pass through in 3 seconds. He wouldn't shoot at targets. He would create a geometric volume of lethal projectiles that targets would fly into. His thumb pressed the firing button. All 8 guns erupted. In 2.7 seconds, Fleming fired 360 rounds into the sky ahead of the German formation. To an observer, it looked like wild, desperate shooting. Tracers didn't converge on any target, but spread in a cone filling empty air. But the air wasn't empty. 4 Messerschmitts were flying through it at 280 miles per hour. The mathematical volume Fleming had filled with projectiles occupied exact coordinates those fighters would traverse. The lead Messerschmitt flew into the densest part of the stream. 14 .50 caliber rounds struck in 1 second. Canopy shattered. Engine exploded. The fighter disintegrated. Oberleutnant Friedrich Weiss, veteran with 19 victories, never had time to process what killed him. The second Messerschmitt, flying slightly right, entered the pattern at its edge. 7 rounds struck right wing. 3 hit fuselage. 2 penetrated cockpit. Lieutenant Hans Schmidt managed to transmit one word, unmöglich, impossible, before his aircraft inverted and dove. The third fighter, flown by Oberfeldwebel Klaus Richter, received less concentrated fire. 4 rounds struck engine. 2 hit wing root. Not immediately fatal, but crippling. Engine seized. Wing structure weakened. He had 40 seconds before structural failure. The 4th Messerschmitt, far left of formation, received only 3 hits, but 1 was catastrophic. An armor-piercing incendiary penetrated fuselage where coolant lines ran. Glycol sprayed into hot engine. In 15 seconds, the engine would overheat. In 30, it would seize. Feldwebel Otto Hartmann immediately broke right and dove for emergency landing. He would survive, but his combat was finished. The entire engagement from Fleming's first burst to last German breaking off lasted 4.7 seconds. 4 enemy fighters effectively destroyed by calculated geometry rather than instinctive marksmanship. Walsh's voice came over radio, barely controlled. "Professor, what the hell was that? You weren't even aiming at them." -2, I was aiming at the volume of space they would occupy. Statistical probability of intercept was 89% given their formation spacing and velocity vector. You calculated that while diving? The differential equations are relatively straightforward once you... Fleming paused. Contact. 9 o'clock high. 2 bandits. Engaging. But remaining German fighters had seen what happened. The apparently random burst that destroyed 4 aircraft simultaneously terrified them more than precise gunnery. Precise shooting, they understood. This was something else, inexplicable, as if the American could predict where they'd be before they moved, which was exactly what Fleming had done. He had turned aerial combat into applied mathematics. The Germans broke off their bomber attack and retreated. The crippled B-17 staggered back toward England with its crew alive. The return flight was tense. Fuel was critical. Fleming landed at Martlesham Heath with 73 gallons remaining. Exactly what his calculations predicted. Ground Crew Chief Master Sergeant O'Donnell approached. "Lieutenant, gun camera shows 4 confirmed kills. 4 in one burst. How?" Fleming pushed up his glasses. "Ballistic trajectory calculations combined with formation geometry analysis, Sergeant. The German fighters were positioned in predictable spatial arrangement. I calculated the volume they would occupy and filled it with projectiles. O'Donnell laughed gently. Professor, you can just say you're really good at math. Fleming smiled faintly. Yes, Sergeant, I'm really good at math. The debriefing was chaotic. Every pilot who saw Fleming's run was talking simultaneously. Major O'Brien shouted for silence. Fleming, report. Fleming stood, adjusted glasses, delivered his account with precision. Sir, at 0914 hours, I observed 4 enemy Messerschmitt 109s attacking damaged B-17. Analysis of their formation geometry suggested tactical opportunity. I engaged with Second Lieutenant Walsh as wingman. Initial engagement, 0914 and 36 seconds. I fired 3-second burst at bearing 278 degrees, elevation -12 degrees, range 600 yards. The burst created probability cloud of projectiles that enemy formation would transit. Results were 4 enemy aircraft destroyed or critically damaged within 5 seconds. I expended 360 rounds. Ammunition efficiency, 90 rounds per kill, significantly below squadron average of 2,300. Assessment suggests volumetric fire patterns optimized for formation geometry may be more efficient than individual target tracking. Silence. Finally, Morrison spoke. Fleming, did you calculate all that while diving at 500 miles per hour? Yes, sir. The equations are relatively simple once you... Stop. O'Brien held up hand. I don't understand what you did, but it worked. 4 confirmed kills. That makes you an ace. Congratulations. Thank you, sir. I would note the approach could be systematically taught if we develop proper protocols. The mathematics are undergraduate-level physics and calculus. Any pilot with adequate background could... Fleming, O'Brien interrupted. You're the only pilot in this Air Force who could do that. Because you're the only one crazy enough to calculate differential equations while people are shooting at you. The squadron's attitude transformed overnight. The professor became respect rather than mockery. Pilots sought his company, asking about tactics, performance, combat theory. By December 1943, Fleming had 10 confirmed kills. But his true value wasn't personal score. It was analyzing combat patterns and developing tactics others could use. He created applied mathematics for tactical fighter employment, explaining optimal gunnery, formation geometry, fuel management using mathematical principles. Most pilots found it incomprehensible, but those who understood became significantly more effective. Major O'Brien forwarded Fleming's manual to 8th Air Force Headquarters. This represents the most thorough tactical analysis I have encountered. Lieutenant Fleming has systematically studied fighter combat and identified principles that could transform pilot training. Response came 6 weeks later. Analysis deemed too technical for general pilot population, however, approved for use in advanced tactics courses for commanders. Fleming's innovations began appearing throughout 8th Air Force groups, often without attribution. Volume firing, fuel management calculations, optimal altitude determinations became standard doctrine. In February 1944, Fleming was promoted to first lieutenant and given flight command. His calculator flight, with 3 technically educated wingmen, became devastatingly effective. In 3 months, they shot down 27 German aircraft with 0 losses. But the approach was controversial. Traditional pilots valued instinct and aggression. They viewed Fleming's methods with suspicion, arguing combat was too chaotic for systematic analysis. The debate came at March 1944 Commanders' Conference. Fleming was invited to present his methods to senior leadership. Standing before colonels and generals, veteran pilots from the previous war, he delivered a presentation challenging fundamental assumptions, using projections, statistics, mathematical models. He argued aerial combat was a deterministic system governed by physics and probability, not art dependent on talent. Gentlemen, he concluded, we have been selecting and training pilots based on marginally relevant characteristics. Aggression, physical fitness, instinctive reactions are less important than analytical thinking, technical knowledge, mathematical aptitude. A pilot who understands ballistics, energy management, geometric relationships will consistently outperform a physically superior pilot relying on instinct. The room erupted. Senior officers who fought in the previous war rejected his thesis, citing experience, fighting spirit, the indefinable quality of natural fighter pilots. But Brigadier General Kepner, 8. Fighter Command Commander, silence debate. Lieutenant Fleming, can you teach this systematically? Yes, sir. I've developed standardized curriculum requiring 40 hours classroom instruction in physics and mathematics, followed by applied training. Students need adequate background, roughly 2 years college-level calculus and physics. How many pilots meet qualifications? Fleming pulled statistics. Approximately 12% have sufficient mathematical background. An additional 38% could reach proficiency through remedial education. Total, approximately 50% could be trained in systematic tactical analysis. Kepner studied numbers. 50% performing at your flight's level represents force multiplication of 2 to 1, equivalent to doubling fighter strength without manufacturing a single additional aircraft. He looked around. I'm authorizing pilot training program based on Lieutenant Fleming's methods. Test course, 50 pilots with strong technical backgrounds. Lieutenant Fleming will design curriculum and oversee implementation. This is how Richard Fleming, the nerdy lieutenant squadrons mocked, became architect of revolution in American fighter tactics. If this incredible story of intellectual courage has inspired you, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear that being different, being analytical, being the nerd, can be your greatest strength. And if you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, what are you waiting for? We dive deep into the untold stories of World War II, the innovators, the underdogs, the brilliant minds who changed history. Hit that subscribe button and join us for more amazing stories like this one. Now let's see how Fleming's legacy transformed American aviation. His Technical Fighter Tactics School opened at Goxhill, England in May 1944. The curriculum was revolutionary. Mornings in classrooms studying differential equations, ballistic trajectories, energy management. Afternoons in applied flight training, evenings in detailed debriefings analyzing every maneuver with slide rules. Traditional pilots called it fighter college, dismissing it as academic nonsense. But results were undeniable. Graduates achieved kill ratios 2.7 times higher while suffering 40% fewer losses. By August 1944, Fleming's method was standard advanced training for all 8th Air Force fighter pilots with adequate mathematical background. German pilots expressed confusion in interrogations. American pilots have changed, said Hauptmann Friedrich Meyer, veteran with 32 victories. They used to be predictable, aggressive, easy to bait. Now they fight like machines, calculated, precise. You cannot trick them because they don't react emotionally. They calculate your intentions and counter mathematically. Fleming's final combat mission came November 23, 1944. Leading a flight escorting B-17s to Luna, they encountered 6 Me-262 jets that could outrun any Allied fighter. Conventional tactics were useless against jets, but Fleming had studied the Tu-62 obsessively. He knew its weaknesses. Jet engines required careful throttle management, high speed made tight maneuvering difficult, and critically, it had to slow down to attack bombers accurately. When German jets dove at the bombers, Fleming didn't chase. Instead, he calculated where they'd be after their attack, when speed would be reduced. He positioned his flight 3,000 feet below and 2 miles ahead, exact geometric position where jets would emerge. The lead Me-262, flown by Oberleutnant Heinz Bahr with over 200 victories, completed his pass and began zoom climb. He never saw the P-47 waiting until Fleming's gun spoke. 50 caliber rounds stitched the jet's fuselage. The thin skin couldn't withstand punishment. Rounds penetrated fuselage, severed controls, punctured fuel tanks. The jet rolled and dove trailing smoke. Bahr ejected at 3,000 feet. It was Fleming's 13th confirmed kill. More importantly, validation of his thesis. He had defeated cutting-edge technology not through superior equipment or prowess, but through superior analysis. Fleming returned to the United States in December 1944 to help develop post-war fighter training. His methods became foundation for how American pilots would fly in Korea, Vietnam, and beyond. After the war, he earned Ph.D. in aeronautical engineering from MIT, joined faculty at California Institute of Technology for 34 years. He rarely spoke about combat. His students knew he'd been a fighter pilot, but few understood the quiet professor had been one of the most effective in the European theater. When Fleming died in January 1983 at 63, his obituary focused on academic achievements. Combat record was mentioned briefly. At his funeral, old wingman David Walsh delivered eulogy. The world called him professor, sometimes as mockery, sometimes respect. But those who flew with him knew truth. He was warrior who fought with calculus instead of rage, physics instead of fury. He showed us the most dangerous person isn't biggest or strongest or most aggressive. It's the one who understands the rules better than anyone else. But in an era celebrating courage and physical prowess, Dick Fleming proved intellectual courage. Willingness to think differently and challenge conventional wisdom could be just as valuable. He saved dozens of lives with his tactics. He changed how America trains fighter pilots to this day, and he did it while remaining exactly who he was, a nerdy kid with thick glasses who loved mathematics more than glory. German pilots who encountered him thought they were fighting just another American. They didn't realize they were facing a weapon they had no defense against, a mind that could turn aerial combat into applied mathematics and win. Fleming's legacy extends beyond combat record or tactical innovations. He represents fundamental truth about warfare, that knowledge and analytical thinking can be as decisive as any physical advantage. Modern fighter pilots receive extensive training in mathematics, physics, systems analysis. Combat is understood as technical problem requiring analytical solutions. But perhaps the most important lesson is recognizing talent in unexpected places. How many Richard Flemings have been overlooked because they didn't fit conventional warrior image? The squadron that mocked Fleming nearly missed benefiting from his genius. Only through persistence and undeniable results did they recognize his value. Fleming's story highlights importance of intellectual courage, willingness to think differently when everyone insists you're wrong. Every instructor who said combat was about instinct, every pilot who mocked his calculations, every commander who doubted his approach. They represented conventional thinking trying to suppress innovation. Fleming persisted through confidence in mathematical truth. He knew his calculations were correct because physics was undeniable. Geometry didn't care about military tradition. Differential equations governing aircraft performance were impartial arbiters of tactical effectiveness. This intellectual courage, trusting analysis over popular opinion, is perhaps Fleming's greatest legacy. In an era of complex global challenges, we need people willing to think systematically, apply rigorous analysis, trust data over intuition. On October 12, 1943, when he destroyed 4 German fighters in less than 90 seconds using calculated geometry, Fleming proved knowledge is power in most literal sense. Those 4 German pilots, experienced warriors with years of combat, were defeated by mathematics they never saw coming. They mocked the nerdy pilot right until his one calculated move erased them from the sky. In that moment, they learned what Fleming had known all along. In technical domain governed by physics and engineering, the person who understands the rules will always defeat the person who simply reacts instinctively. The slide rules Fleming used are now museum pieces, replaced by computers performing in microseconds what took him minutes. But the principle remains eternal. Knowledge, systematically applied, is the ultimate force multiplier. Analytical thinking, properly trained, transforms average capabilities into exceptional performance. The story of Lieutenant Richard Eugene Fleming, professor who became ace, intellectual who became warrior, nerdy pilot who revolutionized fighter combat, stands as testament to possessed a power of thinking differently. His 13 confirmed victories represent individual achievements, but his true victory was proving brains could triumph over brawn, calculation could defeat instinct, and a thin, bespectacled mathematics enthusiast could become one of the most dangerous fighter pilots in the sky. They mocked him. They underestimated him. They dismissed his methods as academic nonsense. And then they watched in awe as he turned mathematics into the most effective weapon in the arsenal. The nerdy pilot had the last laugh, and it was calculated with perfect precision.